I'll, I was going to say we'll start from left to right, but that might not be appropriate here, but
it's the 26th. Let's start right down the middle.
Okay, well, hello, everyone. I am Representative Michelle Caldier from the obviously the 26th district. So am I supposed to do the 5 minutes now? Yeah. Okay, well, then in that case, I'll stand. Okay, so this was my 9th year in Olympia, and I will tell you that since I've been there, things have changed drastically from when I first came. When I first came, there was the House was controlled by Democrats to the tune of 50 Democrats to 48 Republicans. And in the Senate, it was controlled by Republicans by 1 vote. And the governorship was obviously Jay Inslee. And things were very different because we all had to work together in order to get anything passed in the legislature. Fast forward to today, in both the House and the Senate, Democrats are only 1 vote away in both chambers from having a supermajority. And of course, we still have Jay Inslee as our governor. So things have definitely changed from my perspective as a Republican, where I came in with, very close margins. And then here we are with very steep margins. So what I would anticipate for Emily to be very happy about some issues, both Spencer and I were not too happy. Also, we are currently only one of 2 districts who are occupied by both Republicans and Democrats in our entire state. So there's 49 districts. Only 2 are now considered truly swing, where we have elected both Republicans and Democrats. So we have a very different take, I think, in the 26 compared to if you went to different town halls anywhere else across the state. So I think there were a couple major things coming in. One is what was called the Blake fix. And that one, and I don't want to take up everybody's time. So because and like I said before, I mean that I think that there's many things that we will have different takes on, but with the Blake decision, basically the Supreme Court came down, they did a ruling that said that drug possession in and of itself, the way that our laws were unconstitutional, because someone could carry drugs. Somebody could have put it in my pocket, I didn't know, and I would unknowingly possess drugs, okay? So we could have fixed that by just putting knowingly in there. However, it turned into a huge battle in terms of, some people feel that no matter what, you should never put someone who has drug abuse problems in jail. Another perspective is that I think we all agree that that's not where someone with drug abuse should wind up, but at the same time, sometimes offering treatment, people don't accept it. And so jail is one of those tools that you can use to pressure people into getting some sort of treatment or changing their ways. So as a result, we wound up going through the session. There was a modified fix put forward. One of the things that, I know I can definitely say for sure for both Spencer and I, because the other thing I do want to say is that there's not only just a divide between Republicans and Democrats, but there's a huge divide in communication between the House and the Senate. So sometimes we can all agree on a bill in a House, and then it goes over to the Senate and they just kill it. And they're like, we all hated it. And then sometimes the Senate passes over something unanimous and we all sit there and we're like, what the heck did they do? And we have that divide all the time. And there's a lot of times where we get busy in the House and something will come through and maybe we don't have a chance to talk to Emily quite yet and vice versa. However, I see Spencer on a regular basis because we're in the same, caucus and chamber and everything. So we have a little bit better communication when it comes to some of the things, just because that's just naturally how it was. And I'm sure if I was in the Senate and there were 2 senators and one representative, I could probably say the same thing. There's just always that divide. But as it came forward, both Spencer and I were in close communication with law enforcement, and all the people who were on the ground floor, firefighters. And basically they said, listen, this does nothing. This is a Band-Aid and it doesn't do anything. So we voted against it. And as a result, there was something that, we basically passed de facto drug possession in our state. And the governor then called back a special session. We all came to the table and we agreed on a bill that reduced the penalty from the original law that was put in place, and however had a heavy emphasis on treatment. And I think that what was passed from that was actually a success. However, when it came to the police pursuit laws, because I think that's another one that was a heavy negotiated piece. There's people on both sides of the aisle. One says, yes, we should allow law enforcement to do their job. That was my take. I think that our crime has gone up astronomically. What was originally passed out of, the Senate and the House, I think it did a better job than what we had before, which was close to nothing, in my opinion. However, our local law enforcement said we should have done more. We have the political will to do more. So both Spencer and I voted against it. There were some Republicans that voted in support of it. But that was something that I personally feel that it's my job to listen to the people on the ground floor. And I am not an expert in every facet in every industry. And I have to rely on the professionals on the ground. And if they're telling me that this does nothing, it maybe is better than what it could have been, and they tell me that that's not, that they want us to vote a certain way, then I lean in that area, because I do believe that it's my job to make sure that we're listening to the people, we're listening to the professionals on the ground floor. And in my opinion, what was passed was not good enough. And we had the political will. I'm afraid next year that, people are going to say, oh yeah, we fixed it. And when in reality, it still is not fixed. And we still have handcuffed law enforcement. We have still made it so that, oh man, I mean, you give a politician a microphone. There was so much that happened this year. I am going to pass the baton on. So which one of you guys?
Whatever.
Most junior,
Well, yeah.
Okay, so that was my take of those 2 bills. And obviously, like I said before, there's many topics where we will disagree. I respect Emily and we work very well together, even though we disagree on many issues. So here you go.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah. Well, it was a really busy session, a session in which we passed well over 300 bills. I'm sure there are lots of questions about different particular policies and other things. I've sort of settled into summer brain. The session feels so far away now. I'm Emily Randall. I think I know most of you. I'm your senator. This is my 5th year in the Senate. And so while I still feel new, I'm starting to become a more senior member in our caucus. This year I serve as Deputy Majority Leader of the Senate Democratic Caucus. I chair the Higher Education and Workforce Development Committee and sit on transportation and healthcare. And while we didn't agree on everything this year, I feel really lucky to have two colleagues in Olympia who are willing to work together and have discussions across the aisle, across chambers. Sometimes it's sort of rural and suburban communities against the big city. Sometimes, we bring perspectives in both of our caucuses that, folks who either live in Eastern Washington or East King County don't have. And I think that's really important and powerful. And I also really appreciate the chance to work with Spencer and Michelle, as Michelle and I have been doing for the last few years, on thinking about our capital budget projects. How do we bring money to the programs in our community that really need those investments, whether it's Fish Food Bank or Lake Bay Marina, housing or dental services. It's more effective for all of us when we look at our lists and ask for the same things and figure out how to make the case for leadership on the budget writing committees that these investments matter, not only to our community, but to the region. And we can only do that work together. We also, I don't sit next to either of them on the House floor, but we do try to find times. I try to find chances to go over and wave at, one of them from the wings to try and get perspective on what's happening in the House Republican caucus or in the House more broadly, so that we can try to get some of the bills that do have bipartisan support, or that we have a unique perspective across the finish line. Interesting fact, 95% of the policies that passed this last session, I think about the same number as the session before, had bipartisan support. Doesn't mean they're unanimous, but have support from both sides of the aisle, usually in both chambers. It's a really small minority of policy that takes up a lot of airtime that we have to work so hard on. And I really believe that we are lucky to be in a split district, one that has two-party representation. It is unique. And I think we're able to bring voices to our caucuses that are different than the voices of folks who are in single party represented districts. I think we see nuance differently than a lot of our colleagues, and having a good relationship with each other, just like having good relationships with our community, I think makes us more effective legislators. When I'm in Olympia, I love the chance to meet with folks who come to visit and talk about policy, but interim is the time when I get to spend much more than 15 minutes with neighbors to talk about their issues. And I've already started, hearing from a lot of folks who are planning for next session, whether they're budget asks or whether they've got a bill that they want to get across the finish line. I've been talking to some of our fire and rescue folks on the north part of the district about training classrooms and facilities. I've been hearing from folks about bike infrastructure, hearing about higher education policy, sort of the gamut. Some people want to talk about septic tanks, anything and everything is on the table for constituent meetings. And I restarted, I think some of you were there, our community coffee hour series, because visits like this, when you get the chance to raise what's on your mind and ask us questions, matter so much. And we had overwhelming turnout at Kimball Coffee on Tuesday, 50 people in my coffee hour. I think we overwhelmed the entire Kimball staff. So be extra kind to them next time you go. But I'm always on the lookout for ways to hear about new things, to learn some of the areas. Just like Michelle, I can't be an expert in every field, every policy area, but it's in conversations with neighbors that we're able to prepare for what's next, whether that's housing density and the nuances of maintaining the community character and environmental preservation while also increasing access to housing and affordability, or the ferry infrastructure that's so important to our region. And I heard a buzz the other day that Puyallup may be looking at foot ferry access in Gig Harbor too. So not something that impacts, say, folks in Yakima or the Tri-Cities, but is so important to our district, and policies and areas that I only hear about and know about and understand because of presence in community and conversations with community members who are impacted by it. So I'm happy to talk about policy when you've got questions about it, but that's sort of my approach. And I've also will admit I've been taking a little lighter summer schedule than the last couple. I'm getting married in 2.5 weeks. And so, I've got to manage my wedding spreadsheets. But love the chance to be in conversation with you today and hear what's on your minds.
Oh my gosh, the wedding spreadsheet. I remember that. And Christy was in charge of it, so I did not have to worry too much. I'm Spencer Hutchins, your new state representative. This is my first year in office, and it is a pleasure to be with all of you this morning and a pleasure to be with my colleagues. It's just so interesting coming off of the legislative session. I described it as like you're not coming through a brain fog. It's like you're swimming through a brain fog coming out of the legislative session. It's such a different experience. And I was a legislative assistant way back when, right out of college. So I was not, Olympia was not new to me. The state legislature was not new to me, but the process of being a state legislator to going from private citizen to state legislator to out of session and back into my family and my work and, regular day life. It was really an interesting process of transition. And I got very accustomed to seeing these lovely faces all the time. And then we get into regular life and, we'll catch up from time to time, I guess. Right. So it's been a very interesting process, but a real gift and a privilege for me to serve this community that I have grown up in and that I just love so much. I mentioned we're kind of doing bookends here. I was thinking as I was driving in this morning about the legislative send-off that we did right before the session. And the last thing I said, I remember, was how fortunate and blessed and honored I feel to be able to represent in the state legislature the community that raised me, and just how that really matters and is so important to me. And then having just gone through that first session doing that thing, I'll just, reflect what Senator Randall just said, that we have a unique community and we have a unique voice in the legislature. Emily had mentioned ferries. In the Republican caucus, there are only 2 people from one district that has Washington State ferries in it, in the entire Republican caucus. All of our colleagues come from districts that don't have ferry service, that don't know what Washington State ferry service is like, that don't know what it's like to depend on a boat to get you from home to work and back again. And so it's just an interesting and unique perspective that I think we in the 26th district have as a ferry district, for example, as a district that has been mentioned, that Michelle mentioned, that's represented by Republicans and Democrats simultaneously. That's unique in the state legislature. And so what I'll say from a reflection standpoint is I will tell you, I haven't been thrilled with some of the hyper partisanship that I've seen in Olympia. You talk to someone who says, I really care about this bill. And I look at it and I look at who the sponsors are and I look at what the subject matter is and I go, well, this probably won't get a hearing. Because you just sort of know that based on what this bill is trying to do and who the proponents of it are, it's not going to happen. And I'm one who, and I think this has been mentioned before, I really value dialogue across differences. I really value debate between people who see things in a different way. Variety is the spice of life. And when I look at my community, there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of variety of viewpoints and worldviews and personal experience. And so the kind of the lack of that, maybe I'll say, in the legislative process is something that as a representative from the 26th district kind of was not my favorite thing. I'll just be honest. That's just the reality. So when Emily would come into the wings and I'd look up and there's my senator going, I need to talk to you. That was very cool. And I will tell you, it's not a common thing for members of the House to have their senator come into the wings and say, hey, can I chat? I go over there too. I was peeking my head out onto the Senate floor one day when one of my bills was going through and Emily was like, get back. They're going to gavel you down for getting close to the Senate floor, So that, it's important, I think, for the public that our legislative process is good. And what I'll tell you is our legislature's in session for a short period of time. This last year, 4 months, next year, 2-ish, 2.5. How many bills were dropped? 1,000, 2,000. I mean, a gigantic number of bills were filed. I'm not sure that the best legislating happens in fire hose manner. I'll just be perfectly honest with you. To have 2,000 bills that we're trying to digest and pass or not pass, right? Elevate or fight, amend or keep the way it is in a short 4-month period of time to do good policy work for the people of the state of Washington, that's a challenge. And I came from the Gig Harbor City Council, and I see our county council member here who was also on the Gig Harbor City Council, where we didn't have these kinds of deadlines, these kind of drop dead dates. And so we might take 2 months to discuss a piece of policy, and we come back to it week after week after week. That doesn't really happen in the legislature. So I think from a legislative process standpoint, it was a little stressful. It is a little stressful for us to go, I get a 5-minute bite of this apple in a committee meeting, and then I'll get a 5-minute bite of the apple in a caucus meeting, and then we vote on the floor. That's tough. That's tough when what you want to do is have high level, almost academic level dialogue about the policy that we're making in the state of Washington. So there's just another reflection for you. What else can I say? We've talked about the capital budget. I'm delighted with some of the dollars that came back into our district. And again, great to work as a body, as a delegation. We had a Pierce County meeting, a Pierce County delegation meeting early in the session, where the Pierce County delegation gets together and says, okay, in the broader capital budget, what do we as a delegation think is important? Now, this is a very bipartisan group of people, because in the Pierce County delegation, we have Tacoma, downtown Tacoma, and we have rural Pierce County out past Mount Rainier. So it's a very interesting bipartisan group, and we get together and we talk about what are our priorities that we want to put the imprimatur of Pierce County support on. Well, after that meeting, as we're kind of deciding what to do, the three of us, the only district delegation that got together, huddled up and said, what do we want to say to our county delegation? And we huddled up for 10 minutes to put our heads together about what we as a delegation want to then represent to our county delegation. So it's just the relationships are so important, relationships among the representatives and senators, and relationships between us and the public. And I'll end there because I'm getting the hook as well. But I'll just say again, what an honor and what a privilege to serve this community that again has meant so much to me as I've grown up here. So it's a pleasure to be back here and talk about it with you. Thanks.
Thank you all for your insights. I'm sure we have a number of questions, and let's start with Randall.
Morning.
Morning.
Thank you for coming this morning. I heard capital budget twice out of this presentation. Highway 16 is horrible, and I don't see anything happening. It's been horrible for the last couple of years, but it's getting worse with the population density. But there's an issue more important to our district than Highway 16, and that's Fox Island. $300 million to replace the Fox Island Bridge. Seriously? So there's a rumor going around that there's another option to put a tunnel over to Fox Island, which would cost about $50 million. Have any of you heard about that, or are you looking into that? And our county, thank you for coming this morning. Rob and I had a brief conversation about it, and I'd just like to get your comments.
I'll just jump right in. I lived on Fox Island for a good number of years, and I know that bridge very well. Randy, I have not heard about a tunnel project. I don't, either of my two colleagues have either. So I'd be very curious to know about that and the feasibility of such a thing. But $300 million for that bridge, presumably the last time I was at a public meeting about it, it was sort of presented as residents of Fox Island are going to, very likely have a special assessment price tag on it. That's troubling to me. There are public amenities out there, and it's a county road. So I think we need to be really careful about how much we expect residents of a specific area to fully fund something like a $300 million bridge replacement. But outside of hearing some snippets of rumors here and there, I haven't heard anything directed about the Fox Island Bridge as yet. But presumably, if there's something that needs to happen, we need to look at what our transportation budget can do to help defray some costs. I don't know about others.
Yeah, and I'll just say for Fox Island, which is a county road, I think it's important that we have strong relationships and partnerships and discussion, planning conversations with county, with state, also with our federal delegation, because that kind of price tag, we're going to need money from all sources in order to solve that problem. Similar to what we were able to do in Gorst, what we, do for big ticket infrastructure items like, breakwater. We need the feds to chip in. We need to be able to make the case for money out of the state transportation budget, and we need our local leaders to also chip in. Everybody's got to have skin in the game when it's expensive infrastructure like that.
I think ditto.
Thank you for being here this morning. If you were to believe the national news, we have the distinction of having the highest gas prices in the nation now. And I'm wondering what the legislature is going to do to try and bring us back to where we should be, rather than what the poor and which are having to pay now for a gallon of gas. It's going to be black.
Thank you for that. So that was in part because of the cap and trade program, which at the time, our lovely governor was saying, hey, that cap and trade is here to save the environment and it's only going to be a couple pennies. And there were many people who were screaming from the rafters saying, actually, no, that this is not truly going to help the environment. However, what it will do is have a huge cost of gas. Lo and behold, the people who were screaming from the rafters were right. And I don't know what the final tally is. I think it's 59 cents per gallon is what it has, is the cost of that. One of the frustrating things, especially for me being here as long as I've been, is I'm one of those people where, we make mistakes. We make mistakes in the legislature. And I'm one of those people where if we make a mistake and I vote one way because that's the information I'm provided, I'm happy to say, listen, we made a mistake and we should change things up. I am not seeing that from our governor. In fact, the last speech he gave, he blamed it on all the gas companies, saying that it was their fault for price gouging and that their resolution is to go back and go after the gas companies. There is a concerted effort to get rid of gas combustible vehicles. In fact, we've passed legislation to basically say that we're going to phase out all of those vehicles, that you will not be able to sell your own private vehicle that's gas combustible or hybrid, to move it to electric. Okay. I personally feel that, the whole intent behind it was to punish the polluters and increase taxes on polluters. And if that was the whole intent, that's what you're getting at. We're increasing the taxes for people who use gas vehicles. The problem is a lot of those people are poor. A lot of those people cannot afford to go and buy a new electric vehicle. And on top of that, I look at a lot of the folks who live out in Key Peninsula where they have to drive long distances. So if you live in Gig Harbor and you live right down the street from Fred Meyer, maybe that, you can rearrange everything and you don't travel a whole lot to where the extra amount in gas isn't going to be that much. But if you live out in Key Peninsula, I'm sorry, but that absolutely affects your bottom line and affects how much money that you have for your family, for food and everything else. So I voted against it. I want to repeal that. I do not believe that there is a will right now in the legislature to repeal it, especially with our governor who can easily veto whatever it is that we pass, saying that it's all the gas companies' fault and it's not ours. It was our fault. There's other things that come into play, but we passed that tax. I voted against it, but the legislature passed it. The governor signed it. We should fix it.
Sure. Just up front, I voted for the Cap and Invest Climate Commitment Act policy, and I drive a 1997 Ford Ranger that gets really bad gas mileage. So I understand, the challenges that our community is being confronted with given this law. When I was making the decision about whether or not to vote for it, I was sort of holding the tension. How much do we think it's going to impact people? And what are constituents clamoring for in regards to environmental policy change, remediation, protection, so that, you know, their grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren can live on a world that is on fire. And not everyone believes that that's where we're headed, but you know, that tension between impact on people right now and impact on future generations is a hard one. It's a hard one as a policymaker, and I think as people living in our community. I know my mom has a lot of stress about whether she's recycling enough and whether she's purchasing too many plastics, and that like her environmental anxiety is very high. And she makes a lot of decisions about where she can afford to drive to because she's an underpaid paraeducator. That's reality for all of us. The spike in gas prices is hitting hard, and we have started to have conversations. The governor has not, but in our caucus about what we can do and how we can reinvest dollars that we have or move levers to try and relieve some of the impact on consumers. I don't think there's will to repeal the policy, and, you know, Representative Caldier is right. The governor would veto it. But it also is raising, the cap and invest policy is raising significant revenue for climate resiliency work, for solarizing school districts, for investing in climate remediation. We're going after some money for the city of Gig Harbor for a shoreline resiliency study. The city needs dollars to figure out if, when the next king tide comes with sea level rise, how do business owners, you know, on the waterfront in Gig Harbor and in Purdy weather that storm? How do we adapt to the changing reality of climate change and, you know, come out on the other side strong? Do I think the oil companies are a little bit to blame? You know, before the law went into effect, we saw oil companies raising prices, and oil company CEO salaries are also continuing to increase. So the Attorney General's office is exploring any price gouging that they're seeing. But I think we need to do work on the affordability side too. So that's just sort of some insight into how I think about the tensions of doing it all.
Terry, I really appreciate the question, because this gets to the heart of something that I think from a philosophy of government standpoint is crucial that our elected representatives understand and embody. And that is everything we do in Olympia has a real life effect, positive or negative, on people's lives. And sometimes the bad comes with the good, and sometimes the good comes with the bad. Right. And there are unintended consequences. So if we grant, you know, the other side who voted for this tax the most grace possible and say they didn't know the unintended consequences were going to be maybe as onerous as they are. Okay, except the consequences are onerous. And I think what we have to make sure we're doing is understanding that there's only so much that your average member of the public can bear before they can't afford to live somewhere anymore. My wife and I are literally right now, over the last 3 days, we are really intensively budgeting. Post-session, I'm like, okay, we got to look at our finances and make sure we're healthy. We are really intensively budgeting. And I will tell you that our fixed expenses per month are making up such a gigantic, and I'm talking 75 to 80% chunk of our income, that you look at where we can cut, and we're starting to get to the point where Christy and I are going, I'm not sure where more we can cut, except let's just not drive as much. Now, Terry, I'm in real estate. I have to drive in order to do my business. That's just, but I'm a state representative in the 26th. I am going up and down that corridor multiple times a week. I'm not sure how I personally can cut down how much I'm driving. And so if we're looking at it from a cost of living standpoint, at some point we're going to be driving good people out of Washington, and there will be a real life consequence to our economy, to our communities. And so I just really, what you're hearing from me, I hope, is this desire for the state legislature to look not just at what our policy priorities are, but to look a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road to the best we can to say what are going to be the consequences downline for us, for our community, for our people. And on this one, we could see it. We could see what the consequence is going to be. I remember a year ago sort of being called out for fear mongering about what gas prices were going to do. If anything, I underestimated it. And so, we have to be really serious about the consequences of what we do. And for families like mine and families like yours, if you look at what you're paying per month in gas, when the state the effect of what the state has done is to drive up gas prices, there's only so much less driving you can do to accommodate the increase in gas prices, at which point you say, how can I live my life? How can I do my work? How can I get my kids to school? So we need to repeal it. And there's not the will to do it, but we need to work on getting the will to do it.
Hi, Nate this restaurant, State Harbor in Silverdale. Let's talk about ferry systems, since you mentioned your comments. We pushed back on ferry systems. We're trying to get PIO to come out and talk to us, Greater Kitsap Chamber. They're ignoring us. They won't come face the meeting. We're suffering. Governor's ignoring us. What are we going to do about the session? Thank you. So sorry.
All right, really quickly, and I'll be done talking for a second. Listen, can I just say I'm pretty frustrated about what happened with our transportation budget this last session. We had a unanimous transportation budget out of the House, and I think it was unanimous or close to out of the Senate. Highly negotiated, and this is an example of great bipartisanship in the legislature. I'm an assistant ranking member on the Transportation Committee, so I'm one of the Republicans in the room, and there are Democrats in the room. And from the get-go, we are in a conference room building a joint bipartisan transportation budget. And I've got to give a lot of credit to the chair of that committee, Jake Fye, over in the 27th across the bridge. He solicits and encourages a bipartisan process. We had a great transportation budget. And then what happened? Well negotiated at the legislative level, and the governor takes his veto pen to the whole thing. Not the whole thing. He didn't veto the whole budget, but he goes and he does section veto of different sections of the budget, and rewrote our state transportation budget with his section veto pen. I personally, from a balance of power standpoint, think that's out of balance. And so that's a different conversation we can have. But so much of what I think we're dealing with on our ferry system right now is an unrealistic view of what is needed. We have got to get boats online yesterday, a year ago. We have got to get new boats online. We have got to, and this may be controversial to some, we have got to be able to go out of state to get boats at the best possible price we can get them. We've got to be realistic about some of the demands that we place on our ferry system procurement. We want the cleanest, most efficient hybrid, ferries, and we want them at this price on this timeline, and we're not going to get any of those things. We're not going to get them at this price on this timeline. What I think we really have to do is be willing to look at the best diesel technology possible, out-of-state builders, or at least as competitive a building process as we can get to get the best price and the fastest turnaround. And right now, what we're facing is we have a limited pool of ferry resources. How many more can go out? How many more can crash into Bainbridge Island before we don't have ferries to run a route at all? And so this is very, I agree with you. It's very serious. And unfortunately, it's like every day that passes is years out from when it's going to be solved. I think, and we had a bill to sort of to work on fixing the ferry procurement process. And I was glad to see that go through. We have got to get serious about how we do ferry procurement. And unfortunately, the governor's an easy punching bag for Republicans in the legislature. But I'll just tell you, the governor's perspective on how to do ferries, I think, is not based in reality of what it's like on the ground to live relying on a ferry system.
So I will tell you that since I've been here, I have seen how the agency has been ran, and it is far worse today than what it was when I first got in. And what you have to understand is what we do in the legislature is we'll put together the budget, we fund the ferries, we say, here's what the plan is, and then we tell the governor, this is what we want for the agency. it's the governor's responsibility to make sure that the agency is ran well and is doing what we're executing, which many times does not happen. So, and you also have to understand that historically, the governor went and illegally went through and vetoed stuff out of the transportation budget, totally changed it to where the legislature, Democrats and Republicans, and this is the process, we had to take him to court and basically say, what you've done is illegal and you're not allowed to do it anymore. So he still is allowed to do veto, but not vetoing to the extent that he did before. And yes, it has been very frustrating working with our lovely governor, because when there are problems with his agency, he does not do a very good job of addressing those issues. And it is incredibly frustrating. And for the colleagues that I've worked with Greg Wire, they said it was night and day difference, that when there were problems with the agency, she actually did a very good job of managing it and addressing those issues. It didn't matter if it was a Republican or Democrat that brought that issue forward, that she actually did a very good job of making sure that whatever the problem was, it was getting addressed. We do not currently have that. And it was incredibly frustrating because we just went and I was there at a press conference where literally the press asked him about the failures of the ferry system, and his response was, it's all Tim Eyman's fault. And that to me is so frustrating, because it tells me that we have a leader that does not accept responsibility for the failures within the agency. So one of the cool parts, though, is that we were able to get it passed, because historically there was a monopoly on who was manufacturing and making the ferries. We were paying Nordstrom prices for a Walmart product. And I have no offense to Walmart, I'm just saying it's different than Nordstrom, okay? And so that's the thing, is that we all came together and we said, we need a competitive bidding process. And that alone was incredibly hard to pass, but we were able to get that put into place. And so hopefully we will have more ferries put out there. We are going to be getting another governor. I do believe that the people, I think no matter what, I'm hoping it will be an improvement. So I still have hope for a ferry system. We're still going to fight for it, but that's the current state.
Well, I won't belabor the capital portion of the ferries, because I think my colleagues have said all of the things that I would have wanted to say. We needed to build outside. We needed ferries yesterday, 10 years ago. We haven't built them. Now it's going to take some time. We also have ferry staffing challenges. And, my first year in the legislature was 2019. And we were talking about the wave of retirements that was coming then. And it's true in the maritime industry across the country. We're seeing this wave of maritime retirees and not enough folks entering the pipeline to get trained to be deckhands. And because of the federal requirements of our ferries, one person calling out can mean that the boat isn't staffed enough to run. So a lot of our cancellations are staffing related. We passed some policy and had a work group and are implementing some of the changes to the training process. I think historically we wouldn't have seen the legislature sort of meddle in the agency's training approach, but because of all of the reasons that you've heard, we felt like we needed to push some changes forward. So they're cross-training folks, so that, if one person is out, there's another person who may not be, a deckhand or an oiler who has some experience and can step in. We're now moving to, ferry workers in their first years used to be on call. You'd never know which run you were running. You'd never know if you were going to have a full work schedule. You might have to be on Whidbey one day and Bremerton the next. But now we're guaranteeing folks a fixed route and the ability to have a full-time schedule, which is seeing more people coming in and wanting to be trained. There are some other barriers that we're continuing to look at. I chair the Higher Ed and Workforce Development Committee. So I am looking at workforce needs across sectors, and maritime is one. We have desperate needs. But yesterday I was touring the West Sound Technical Skill Center in Bremerton, where a lot of Gig Harbor and Peninsula High School students go. And they were talking about their maritime training program being one of the likeliest to grow in the next 5-10 years, more students coming in. We've got the Maritime High School in, across the bridge in Pierce County or Federal Way. So there's lots of interest in the field. So what my ask to you to help us in this work, we're going to keep putting pressure on the legislature but talk to the young people in your life and see if any of them want to join the ferries, because the Kitsap Transit boats are having some of the same challenges. They're trying to pick up as much slack, and we've diverted some funding from the state ferries budget to Kitsap Transit's budget so that they can add additional runs. But they also have, if someone calls out, a shortage of staff to be able to run those boats. And so we need more people who are interested in ferry work, and we're going to keep advocating for our ferry dependent community. And I'll ask state ferries to send their PIO to Chamber of Commerce. Yeah.
We have time for one really quick question. Does anybody have a?
He gives us 3 very quick answers. Is what
You're sharp.
yeah.
Thank you for being here today. I have to bring up, of course, the question that no one wanted to bring up, the Senate Bill 5677. Do I have that right? 5677.
I'm trying to remember which one we're talking about. As we all reach for our phones.
Okay, what is it about?
State fines, to
55.99.
59. Oh, what did I say?
Doesn't matter.
That's okay. See, this is what he meant about a quick question.
Yes.
Oh, this is the tough one that everyone's been talking about.
I'll start. So 5599 is a policy that I'm a co-sponsor of, that we passed in the legislature to protect young people who are seeking access to healthcare, whether that's gender affirming care or comprehensive reproductive health care, and who are not safe to tell their parents, or who are, fleeing a dangerous situation. It allows them to check into a shelter and have the shelter not immediately tell the parents, but instead tell the Department of Children, Youth and Families that has a family reunification program that will then work with the young person and the family to try and reunify them and bring them back together. There was a referendum effort. Some of you might have been involved in it or seen folks at the Cushman Trail providing information. The referendum did not successfully get enough signatures to be put on the ballot. So this law went into effect. I supported this policy because I personally know people who grew up in unsafe family situations when they were coming out or had to seek healthcare, and it was unsafe for them to tell their family. I'm really lucky. I grew up in a family that was very welcoming and supportive of me when I came out, and that's not the case for so many students, so many young people across the country and even our communities. Last year, when I was doorbelling, I was in a neighborhood where a young person had taken their life because their gender identity made them the target of bullying in schools and in the community. We know that the suicidal ideation rate and the rate of suicide attempt is much, 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 much higher in the LGBTQ community because of unwelcoming family or communities or state legislatures in some states. And anything that we can do to make sure that young people are able to stay alive and to be secure in themselves and their identity, I think is important for us to do. There's a lot of misinformation going around about the policy, about, you know, increased access to medical care for younger people. That's not true. But protecting folks who are trying to live their lives as themselves and have bodily autonomy, who are experiencing a lot of unsafe circumstances, a lot of hate or fear or questioning or challenging to themselves, I think it's important for us to combat, to make sure everyone has a chance to live their life here in Washington safely.
Okay, so remember I told you how there's times where both Emily and I disagree. This is one of those. There's actually a lot of what she said that I completely agree with. Number one is that there's a lot of misinformation out there. This did not expand access to getting certain, what's called protected healthcare, which is getting an abortion or having, getting gender care. It did not change that. Children are allowed to do that. They're allowed to currently get an abortion at any age, or they're allowed to get gender affirming care without the parent's permission at age 13. That was done long before I ever came. So this bill did not change that. I absolutely agree that children who are coming out, they have so many challenges ahead of them. And I completely agree that bullying is awful. And you can look at the suicide rate for those kids, and it's horrible. And I want to do everything I can to help those children out. However, this bill changed things in terms of parental rights. So for many years, I've been a foster parent. There is a process to where if a parent is abusive, that we can terminate, the state can terminate the parent's rights. I have taken in children where their parents raped them, that there were allegations of rape, that they've abused them to the point where they were hospitalized. Those parents still have rights. The parents still know where their children are. And we have to go to court, and there's a whole process to terminate their rights. What this bill did, and this is why I'm opposed to it, is it circumvented that whole process. And if the kid is being abused at home, there's already a process to where DCYF, the Department of Children, Youth and Family Services, will become involved, and we can terminate the parents' rights or allow the child to be raised without the parents knowing their whereabouts. What this was if there is, if the parents are not fully supportive, and I will tell you that for most parents out there across our country, and you also have to remember there's a lot of grandparents raising their children and across cultures, the whole concept of a child changing their gender is, I think it's fair to say, it's not widely accepted across the country and across cultures. And those are conversations, those are difficult conversations that many parents and grandparents are having with their children. And that is a normal thing. However, if there's abuse involved, there's already a pathway to terminate the parents' rights. What this did was it circumvented that. And just having the conversation alone, I remember the debate on the floor, there was one woman who stood up and she said, well, what about all the microaggressions that a child is going through? And there are so many things that happen in a family dynamic. You can still love a child and disagree with some of the choices that they're making. I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. However, this pathway to me was completely wrong. And if it said in there that this was, if there was abuse, any allegations of abuse, I would have supported that. Absolutely, because we already have that process in place. But this was over conversations of not fully affirming that. And that was the piece that I had an issue with. So I voted in opposition. There was a short window to collect signatures. There was not enough signatures to be collected, so it is going to go into law. And there will be parents out there who have a disagreement with their child and not know where their child is at. And it will take time before this comes into play, but I think that there's a lot of families that are going to be really upset over this. So anyhow.
I mean, not in the interest of time, I think Michelle said everything I would say. I could go into more of the nitty gritty of the specific bill, but I know we're near the end of our time. I voted against this for the same reasons. And this was a really tough, it's a very tough issue. And this was one where I got choked up on the floor when I was speaking about this bill, because all I could see during that debate was any one of my kids having a very challenging time of life and being gone from me and not being told where they were and how they were and what was happening. I think I just don't think that's right for the state to come in between parents and kids, even in extremists like this. And if there is evidence of abuse or neglect, the law is already there. And if there's more we need to do to create more protections and supports for kids, absolutely. It seems like a pretty 0 to 60 solution to say if the child is seeking gender affirming care or reproductive health care and they go to a shelter, that the parents by definition will not be told where they are. That just seems really difficult to me. So that was why I voted no on the bill, and it's a tough issue.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can we give them a round of applause? Our time is up, but Joe, you were going to talk about who's coming next week.
Yeah, this week we've got Kenny Wallman, the CEO of Cape Martin.
Gotta say that again.
Hang on.
Hey, folks, next week we have Jenny Wellman, the CEO of Gig Harbor Now.
See you all next week.